record on this computer. Okay, so we'll do that.
Okay. Be a little bit more on the healthier side for sure.
Well, it's supposed to have less fat. I can't, I'm very excited you're here and I'm very thankful you're here because I don't think we visited in like been to a class in like 2 or 3 years since COVID. So, and then, let me just say that we're here to celebrate Women's History Month, but at the same time, we would like you to share your stories and other women that's been around you that have influenced you and they make the world better. Again, I'm a business guy and women have exploded in business the last 20, 30 years. You know, they own millions and millions now. Probably if there's 20 million businesses that are small in the US, I bet half of them are owned by women. And they actually have higher success starting off, a certain percentage, 60 versus 50. So they're very successful, a lot of online businesses. So we're celebrating women, but they've really exploded in business. So now I would like to tell all of y'all that I'm gonna have to read this because I won't say it right. Sadie Red Wing is a Lakota, Dakota graphic designer and an advocate from the Spirit Lake Nation. She received her Master's of Graphic Design from North Carolina State University. Her research on cultural revitalization through design tools and strategies created a new demand for tribal competence in graphic design research. So Red Wing urges Native American graphic designers to express visual sovereignty in their design work, as well as encourage academia to include an indigenous perspective in design curriculum. And currently, Red Wing serves as an assistant professor at OK University, one of the top universities in Canada, in Toronto, and that's why and when she spoke to my classes several years ago, I realized how ignorant I was of these topics. I'm so old. I grew up in Plessy, Ferguson, separate but equal. So, there were no Black Americans in my class in the early 60s. So, I mean, it's just, and it's wonderful now, the change. I have a lot of hope, but I don't know much about Native Americans or Indigenous Americans. And what we're taught in history is just not it. I mean, Native Americans, Indigenous Americans, the first owners of the land were here 50 to 40,000 years, so Sadie, I'm going to turn it over to you and we'll see what direction it goes. And we'll try to raise our hand if anybody wants to ask a question. So please feel free to interrupt our discussions, everybody, to talk, because we're just here conversing. But again, I'm so thankful and grateful you're here, Sadie Red Wing.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Ralph said, like I presented in Ralph's class during the pandemic, and to think that was what, 2021, going on like almost 3 years. It feels like it was just yesterday. So again, Ralph, thank you for the invite. I will admit what I have might be a little bit loaded, a little bit of a doozy. So I probably take up majority of the time. So for those watching, again, like it will be a lot. So just giving you a warning, a little bit of information overload. Again, I'm coming in as a graphic design professor. So I'm trying to get it out of to make it seem like a lecture, maybe something a little bit more as if maybe you're watching a movie or something. But yeah, just a conversation, a discussion. I do have a few women to highlight here. So once I get going, I'll share my screen, I'll introduce myself. But again, absolute pleasure of just having this time and space with everybody. So again, coming into this conversation, well, I guess let me get my screen shared and we'll get my PowerPoint going up. Then I'll go into everything here. Just before I get going, like I said, I'll get on a roll. I'll get into lecture mode. So sometimes I'll miss stuff in the chat, particularly when I'm in full screen mode. It's been a little bit of a noisy morning, so I'm fingers crossed that we don't have much noise disruption on my end. Again, like I'm in downtown Toronto. Oh, sorry.
I forgot. I apologize. We're not doing this very often. I forgot to introduce Migdalia Garcia. She's with me here, and she heads our peace initiative here on campus. and we're in a classroom and there's several students behind me in here. So so this is one of the business classrooms. So Migdalia is here to help me think of questions to ask you.
Sure thing. Sorry, I just realized I had the wrong presentation up. So one more time on that screen share. So again, like when I get into lecture mode or when I get into full screen mode, like I'm not necessarily paying attention to the chat, but if I jump off or if my audio cuts out, just someone chime in, interrupt me. Again, I'm pretty used to it. And then also I'll do my best to kind of keep track on time. But again, as we get more hitting towards that 45-minute mark, I'll try to definitely wrap it up so we have a little bit of dialogue. But like Ralph said, coming in happy Women's History Month. It's coming to an end. It's not Women's History Month here in Canada, but in thinking about, again, like I'm from the States. I'll give an introduction of myself, but just a couple just warnings. Like I know just a lot is going on in the news. I have a looping GIF that shows some, I guess, how we like, there's a looping GIF about the protests at the Dakota Access Pipelines. There's a little bit like, not police brutality, but there is some just confrontation in a slide. So just a heads up, again, not knowing where everyone's coming into the space, mindful of everybody's mental health. So I'll try to catch it, but just a trigger warning. I do have a looping slide that shows some protest confrontation at the Dakota Access Standing Rock Pipeline there. So I'll get all into that. But first, what I will do is introduce myself, share a little bit of just some of the lineage, pay homage to some Lakota women warriors, do a little super brief history, and then go into my journey as just as an advocate, activist, as a graphic designer, talk about some terminology that comes up within my realm of research that might be relevant when we're talking about Lakota women warriors, and then wrap up and on a nicer note and show a little bit of my graphic design work. So I said it's a little bit, it's a lot. But again, an opportunity. It's really rare where I really get a chance to I need more than an hour to kind of explain all the work that we do. So again, loaded, cramming a lot of things into one. And then again, just welcome to this presentation here. So my name is Sadie Red Wing. I'll give in this next couple slides, I'll show a little bit of a map, but I'm coming into this as assistant professor, and I am unique. So I teach in 2 departments, and it's still pretty new. So I feel like the United States are not on board yet in including Indigenous design into art and design schools. But in Canada, we have the Truth and Reconciliation policies. So there is a little bit more activity for universities recruiting more Indigenous professors, and hopefully that snowball will reach to the States where we get more Indigenous design into art and design curriculum. So with all that said, coming in as a professor, graphic designer, I work with the American Indian College Fund. So when I was working at the American Indian College Fund, that's when I was acquainted with Ralph. So I'm a student advocate, particularly making sure that underrepresented students get the resources that they need to keep the retention at a university. I do a lot of public speaking, as y'all probably know. In the San Antonio area, or you're probably in just any businesses or any workspace, you're probably hearing about DEI, diversity, inclusion, equity. Definitely, I feel like I demonstrate more of the inclusion aspect areas, but, I kind of just really give an idea on, just again, I feel like there's just not a large population of Indigenous professors and spaces. So there's a lot of curiosities on, what that might look like in a classroom, and then how that might benefit maybe an underrepresented student who is looking for more resources that are non-European in a sense, but to kind of understand where I'm coming from, or to give a little bit of an idea. So my citizenship, again, in the United States and Canada, folks are just not on the same page on how we identify Indigenous citizenship. So in thinking about knowing what a federally recognized tribe is, but when I introduce myself, I say I'm a citizen of the Spirit Lake Dakota Nation. So hopefully you can see my cursor. My cursor is circling that little square in North Dakota. It's a little tiny government, a little tiny nation. If you've ever been up there, it's got some good walleye fishing near the Fort Totten area, Devil's Lake area. But I'm also half Lakota. So my Lakota side in my nation of the Lakota is in that central South Dakota. So you hear more Lakota reference, but all y'all need to know is that I am from the Great Plains. So in thinking about these little squares, they don't make justice of the knowledge that I bring in as someone that's Lakota and Dakota. All I know is prairie. All I know is northern grasslands. I know north of Texas has southern prairie as well. So just in thinking about what my ideology is coming, or my expertise is just definitely the traditions that come from the prairie, but that all makes sense in a second. But I always show this. Again, I work with international students. I work with students that may have never left their state before, may not have left their neighborhoods before. So I show this and thinking about South Dakota. This is probably what it looks like right now. If you went up to Black Hills or the Rapid City area, still snow on the ground. But again, like working with international student group, I do have students that are affected by communism, or they're just unaware of the history of the continent of North America. So place definitely plays a part in a lot of my research, and definitely in highlighting some of the women that are coming up here, but just taking it all in. Come to South Dakota in July after our rainy season and everything's blooming. The prairies are beautiful and green. Our buffalo look a little bit more nicer on there. But yeah, just to kind of give a little bit of introduction. So in highlighting Women's History Month, like again, like if I was going to highlight or pay homage to is definitely our Lakota women warriors. So I'm Lakota. These two women are not Lakota. So I have no relation to any of these women, but I'm showing them because they really made a significant event in the United States history. So these are the two women that actually killed Custer. So I'm not going to go into a whole history lesson, but if you can just know that, again, I'm from the Dakotas. Settlers hit us like 200, 300 years after they hit the East Coast. So we actually got hit with contact with the 7th Cavalry. So when Custer was bringing all the white settlers, those were our first contact. So in thinking about we as the Great Plains nations, we defeated Custer, particularly these two women. Again, they're in the Great Plains too. So thinking about the Arapaho and the Cheyenne, as you get a little bit more west, as you go into Wyoming and into Montana. But just paying, again, homage. Perspective wise, as Indigenous, we highlight these women. If you're someone who's non-Indigenous, they might look a little more like an enemy. But again, I'm talking about warriors. I'm talking about those who fought to keep our existence, because genocide was coming in. Not going to go all through that American history, but just paying a highlight to these two women, because there's a lot of significance in sharing that warrior women aspect. So what is more significant to me? So this is actually my grandmother's sister. So I want to highlight her too, because I do come from a lot of women of activism, and I have, I'll highlight in these next couple slides. So if you're a little bit more from the older generation, grew up around the 70s, you're probably a little bit more familiar with AIM, the AIMsters and the occupants of all, our fights against the US government. But I'm showing this because this is a beautiful piece. When I look at this image, so my aunt, or my grandma, Mabel Ann Phillips, one thing about, back in the day in the 1800s, when it's like the Battle of Little Bighorn, Battle of Greasy Grass, when we're fighting against the cavalry, the Lakota warriors, like we counted coups. So meaning that if we defeated something, we had to show some type of significance that we defeated them. So it's just crazy to kind of see, like when my grandmother is in her regalia, she's paying homage to defeating this the cavalry. So if you can't really see in the cursor, I'm going across the back of her neck. It says Battle of the Bighorn, but basically how she's adorning herself. She looks as if she's paying homage to those two women that fought General Custer. And if you think about taking his coat, so wearing his coat shows some type of significance of showing that she defeated the person. So I like that, and it's a family heirloom. Other than my grandmother, so these are my aunties. So my aunt is the founder of the Lakota Women Warriors. So if y'all are familiar with color guards, they usually come in at the beginning of sporting events where you're bringing the American flag. So again, just keeping that warrior aspect, or just in that society. A lot of my family is military folk. So I'm thinking about those women who served as veterans. They might participate in a Lakota Women's Warrior organization where they might do color guard. So just highlighting my Auntie Kella and all the advocacy she does with female veterans, Lakota female veterans here. This is not a relation, so I'm kind of transitioning in because I'm going to kind of get into my work as being an activist and advocate. But I show this because this is one of my favorite images. I don't know the name of this female, but again, if you grew up in an older generation and knowing in the 70s when the Lakota were occupying Wounded Knee, the times around Dennis Banks and Russell Means and John Trudeau, and thinking about, man, just again, thinking about your rhetorical criticism, you might see this image as maybe as an opposer, but when I see this image, I think of this again as another warrior. You're on a reservation, you know, you got the US government always being a stink towards you, always being a little bit stubborn. So just to see like an older Native American woman protecting her family with a rifle in hand, again, to critique it in a rhetorical way, everybody has a different experience, but in thinking about, man, she just looks badass. Like she just looks cool, like a strong woman. But a lot of that comes from those occupiers of these places. So on this left side, or if you ever actually been to Alcatraz, they still have this writing. My cursor is circling over Indians, welcome. But then when like in the indigenous people, and they do it to this day around Thanksgiving, they'll occupy Alcatraz over by California. And then I pulled this image from the web, but they're kind of contrasting, and I'll show a little bit more of my work at Standing Rock too, of how those occupiers of places against the US government are still in effect. You may not see it on the news channel. It's still going on to this day. And I know Texas has a history about oil rigs and oil pipelines and stuff like that, but the main thing that I like to transition into my work, and again, just highlighting just powerful women who are leading a lot of these activist groups, is this little piece here. And I'll show this piece again. So in thinking about, this is a piece that I did. So again, I'm showing it again over here. Again, I'm coming in as a graphic designer. Went into the academic route, didn't go into the military route. It's that same, so here's my grandmother again, and then her sister, my grandmother's sister. So outside of fighting against oil pipelines, man, my aunties, any aunties and grandmas, anytime anybody puts a call out, man, these women are in their 80s and they still put their lives on the line in thinking about how they might just be protective of culture, people, family, and everything. So it's just beautiful to see these well-known activists within indigenous land rights and protection, and they're utilizing a print that I did to protest with or protect with. So that is kind of how my kind of connection. And again, like I'm not a veteran. I don't go into the military, but I bring a lot of that pride of coming from Lakota warriors into a lot of my work. So what you're seeing now is the start of my journey. So I know Ralph mentioned March Madness. I am an alum. I graduated with my master's at North Carolina State University. Go Wolfpack. And when I left North Carolina State University, in 2016, we were still stuck on conversations around the stereotypes. So again, I'm just doing another warning. I cuss a little bit in these presentations, but this presentation that you're seeing, you can see my print again, is called Fuck the Stereotype. As a graphic designer, it's a little bit exhausting. Mind you, 2016, we didn't even get to the start of like the dropping of mascots yet. So the conversations around mascots were still pretty strong. But in thinking about from 2016 till now, getting into a decade, coming up in a couple of years here, a lot has changed around those conversations. Don't have to stress, so that's a little bit more nice. Again, my expertise and my target is particularly getting more students educated to work in these spaces. And I feel like a lot of particularly women of color that might come into my classroom, they are wanting to be advocates themselves. They are wanting to maybe they might come from a history where they have identities that have protested or protected or been affected in many ways. You see a lot of it in those migration or immigrant movements in the 60s. If there's, Angela Davis, she said it best, where every single race needed another race to be progressive and moving forward. So thinking in the 70s, the AIM movement, like we needed the Black Panthers, just as much as we needed like the powerful Chicano movements and everything. So yeah, so a lot of this work, and again, these up and coming generations that come from those histories that are coming into graphic design, like they want to be activists themselves. So what I'm showing you is a little bit of the work that kind of launched me into that realm. So if within those prints, it originated, this is the original print, and this original print was actually just for Instagram. So I left North Carolina State, literally walked across the stage with my diploma, hopped in the car, and then I was going to protest at the Dakota Access Pipeline. Once I went there, I noticed that everything that was communicating that pipeline was so stereotypical. It's like, man, we're Lakota, we're Dakota, we're here in Standing Rock, North Dakota, and there's nothing that shows us like our own, like how are we different than any other nation in the country of the United States? So I did this piece, Mini Wachoni, it's Lakota, translates to water is life. And just put a few hashtags on it. Again, 2016s, the way of hashtags were easier to have a little bit more exposure. And then again, algorithms and data weren't as advanced in that time either. But just in thinking about just this piece right here just changed my life, where the Amplifier Foundation, Aaron Huey, this is his son. There was protests going on in Seattle. So his son was the women's protest. Man, crazy to think how long ago that was, but we did have all those women protesting, or those marches, and just to have Aaron Huey's son carry my piece in that Seattle march was very influential. Mass printed, that same organization mass printed my print and was holding down occupiers at Grand Central Station in New York. So again, like I didn't know that this one Instagram post was gonna like catch like wildfire. And then even like this image here is showing in San Francisco. So just have my piece projected on this building. I apologize, I don't know the exact building in San Francisco, but again, as a woman designer, my piece is being used in this protest or pipeline. I didn't know how powerful I would be, or the important role of me as a female graphic designer would play in these movements. And then which led into more organizations that were training protesters to go to Standing Rock. So again, Bay Area, man, Bay Area, San Francisco, you got some good activists out there. So the Indigenous Peoples Power Project, they saw my piece. They said, hey, can we modify it? Can we make it into a silk screen pole? Or I'm trying to think art terms and thinking about, we were going to do an art camp at the Standing Rock pipeline. Like, can we use your piece and do it into like a screen pole? And I say, yeah, sure. So you can kind of see my piece laying there. Again, photography, there's a lot of documentation that was going on during the pipeline. And again, I didn't think about all these photographs that would lead me into places, like lead me to National Geographic. Again, this is not my photo, but the person who is protesting is wearing my banner, or a design that originated from my Instagram post. So just something like this, like I was just looking at this morning, and it's just really humbling. And I was like, wow, like I remember just not taking a shower for days and freezing ass and Standing Rock. And then now, and kind of looking at the journey now that I'm here, like in teaching in OCAD, like I never would have thought that would have happened. Again, just that progression, or just, just moving in that inclusivity spaces and just bringing in more Indigenous perspective into places. And it's been a lot of females that have been running a lot of this. And I feel like and again, this is just generally speaking, I feel like we're really good nurturers as well as just good educators. And I feel like we do a really good job at just kind of, I don't know, being handholders or just making a space a little bit more safe. So very, very privileged, and just coming from these beginnings. So, so that was my start. And when I spoke in that Fuck the Stereotype presentation, what I was trying to say at the time was, as an artist, as a designer, like we are so powerful. When I'm working within graphic design, so I'm going a little bit in lecture mode here in a second, in saying that, as a graphic designer, as somebody that works with, designing types, designing fonts, or designing visual languages that represent nationalities, like we have a lot of responsibility. Like we can't mess up people's languages. Like we cannot mess up how someone visually shows themselves as a nation. So if you think United States, I think I have a slide here. United States, red, white, and blue, stars and stripes, like that's all visual sovereignty. And thinking about when we are activists, so thinking about all those women that are occupying Alcatraz, Wounded Knee, at Standing Rock, we were struggling to show ourselves as a nation. Like we don't have a strong visual sovereignty in the country of the United States. So this is where my research has really led me to be a graphic designer. And then thinking about my job as a graphic designer in showing visual sovereignty, it would be, for example, like at my first slide, you saw my flag. If you can, I don't think I have it in next to this slide, but if you can know that my tribal flag is blue, a light blue, a darker blue, and a yellow. So, and think about where we might see visual sovereignty at, where you don't see Indigenous nations, and think about the World Cup or Olympics, where everybody is showing some form of visual sovereignty. So in thinking about if I, Sadie Red Wing, was going to go to the Olympics, you know, I wouldn't be representing the United States. I'd be representing the Spirit Lake Dakota Nation. So I would be coming in the parade of flags, bringing in my flag. Like if I was, let's say, a gymnast and doing gymnastics, like I wouldn't be my singlet, or not singlet, but my uniform, or what I would be wearing in my competition. Like it wouldn't be red, white, and blue stars and stripes. It would represent what is on my nation's flag. So that light blue, navy blue, and a yellow. But just in thinking about, again, like we're just not there yet. There's not much strong visual sovereignty that represents a lot of these nations. So hence why I like being an educator in graphic design is that, you know, there's all these nations. Again, this is an outdated GIF, but in thinking about I'm just gonna round up to 600. There's 600 governments in the United States. You probably see it more on the western half of the nation. All of those governments, they need graphic designers. So it's just like, yo, like we got to get more educated folks to know how to design for those indigenous governments. So I'm going to transition here and thinking about, well, if you took a class with me, or if you're learning how like Sadie designs for, let's say, an indigenous population in South Dakota, again, all you need to remember is I come from the prairie, I come from the grasslands. There's some grass here, and land is a factor. And we can talk, you know, if there's any questions around, you know, more like land stewardship or land back movements or anything, I don't have it in this PowerPoint, but open to discussion after this, and thinking about the grasslands. So grasslands, so I'm showing you the root of how land plays a role into my graphic design. But there's one component other than like the plants and stuff within the grassland, but just starting within our symbolism. If you know that we have porcupine. Now there's porcupine all over the globe, but the grasslands of the continent of North America, they have their own species of porcupine. But the only thing you need to know in relevance to the symbolism is the porcupine quill. So the porcupine quill, again, women would be the one adorning these pieces back in the day. So just in thinking about where our visual sovereignty or our symbolism or quote unquote our patterns might come from, if you think of a porcupine quill, it's just a line. Like, you know, women were using their teeth, they're flattening those porcupine quills, and then they're weaving them. So again, I feel like this, if Ralph is teaching business, you may not know a lot of more of the conventions of working within design, but if you can just understand that weaving, you're working on a grid. So you can see like this white porcupine quill, it's woven underneath this red porcupine quill. And when you're weaving something that thick, it's a little bit chunky, and you can't really make much. So it's not a paintbrush. Like you can't really paint like a perfect circle or whatever you are trying to visually demonstrate in a woven grid. It's not going to look exactly like whatever comes out of it, it's going to look more symbols. It's not going to look like icons. Like an icon looks exactly like what it's supposed to look like. A symbol, it doesn't. But that porcupine quilt's a little bit thicker. So it's not like a crochet yarn weave. It's a little bit more on the chunkier side. So I pay homage to a lot of those porcupine line work, quill work. So I'm working on the grid. And again, like I have a lot of students that are really learning their identities, and they're really learning their culture and their patterns. And I feel like, again, just knowing how to decipher some of these patterns. So this is me, man, again, 2017 is a little bit while ago, but showing, you know, just paying homage to that line work. And I'm going to decipher this because I feel like after this presentation, if y'all got like Pendleton blankets, or you have like indigenous patterns, you know, at home, or, you know, you might be wearing something, you might see them, you might have greater competency in how to decipher some of that. But if you can follow my cursor, again, depending on where you are, how you're following this, there's this little symbol right here. So there's two right angle triangles reflecting each other. And then there's a diamond. There's a diamond that comes from the middle. Now, if you can think of these triangles as little leaves, and if you can think of this diamond as a flower budding, and then the zigzag here is just a root. So all this is paying homage to is a flower about to bloom. So these roots are growing, and it grows into these two little leaves, and this is the bud of the flower. And it's just reflected all around. So all this, I know the line works, it's interesting, it's geometric, people like it, aesthetically pleasing, but it's just paying homage to flowers budding. And again, it makes sense. I come from the grasslands. We have a lot of roots. We don't have a lot of trees. I don't have examples of like our beadwork. But just in thinking about, again, when you're working on a grid, you're working with those porcupine quills, our visual language is going to look very geometric, have a lot of symmetry. I think people, we'll see a lot of that within pattern work. So this is just example, some of the graphic design work here. I don't have the time to kind of decipher everything in here. And I'll show more examples of some other conventions in our visual language. So we have a unique drawing style, like this little buffalo, the little ledger art here. Here's a piece I did with the College Fund, or sorry, College Horizons. Again, I'm an advocate for Native American students, making sure that they have everything that they need. So anytime an organization, and I have more graphic design work that speaks to that too, reaches out for, graphic design work, that's more of a priority for them. So man, this is a little bit older too. So again, it's been a while since I've seen a lot of that work. Other than porcupine quills, again, visual sovereignty. A lot of the stuff that I have to do within my classroom and I don't have the time to do in this presentation is, again, just generally speaking, as a whole in the United States, not everybody has a mental image of what the continent was look like predominantly indigenous. So folks have no idea, like, what it was like. Let's say maybe I'm from a First Nations community up maybe near Vancouver, and then what is for those folks and maybe Canada, like they would go all the way down to Argentina and Chile. So just in thinking about, again, if folks can't imagine like trade routes or just, let's say that I'm Lakota, maybe the Mayans invited us down to watch the Mayan ball game. And if we didn't speak each other's languages, we didn't get the English language yet, like we didn't have Sharpies to write our names like on the tags of our shirts just yet. Like, how would you know whose stuff is what? And then if I'm Lakota and if I'm like nomadic, like I follow the buffalo. Like I'm not a farmer, like I'm not by the coast, I'm not a voyager. I'm from the prairie. We follow the buffalo. We're always moving. We're always on a horse. We're always camping. So we have a lot of luggage. And I pay a lot of that homage to that parfleche design. So if you can kind of see, it's kind of getting out of that line work. Now we're getting some more of like the concaves or maybe some more of the crescents that comes from like a lot of our luggage pieces. So we are, man, like we know our luggage. And Louis Vuitton actually just launched their winter collection. So they have some indigenous designers that pay homage to the parfleche. But in thinking about, again, parfleche, all this is just like our backpacks. I'm trying to think like what kids wear today, if people are still wearing the Supreme or the fanny packs are going over the shoulder or your satchel or something, like this is the unique work. And mind you, like if I'm going like back in the day, let's say in the 1300s, I'm going down to Cancun, Mexico with my family on horseback. I drop something, like let's say I drop something as I'm passing through Texas. How will anyone know that like that's my luggage? So hence that concept of visual sovereignty. If you see something like this, then it comes from the Great Plains. So and bringing some of that into this work. I share this, and this is just an example of trying to brand that might reflect something that it comes from, let's say parfleche, so Wheezy Pond. Wheezy Pond is actually just our word for like backpack, so it's basically this. The challenge is working with, let's say, a university. So I'm going to transition into doing some of my graphic design work within universities here. So South Dakota State University wanted to brand their Native American Student Center. They're calling it Wheezy Pond. And then within the Wheezy Pond, this branding project dropped because not everybody is on the same page when it comes to indigenous languages. Man, designing with indigenous language, like I need like a whole other week to like go up to explaining about all the challenges within there. But to just grasp some of the challenges is that our dictionaries aren't consistent. So the dictionaries from like the AIM movement in the 70s are different than the dictionaries in 2024. So not everybody's on the same page or on spelling. And South Dakota State, they didn't want the spelling of how it's spelled in our new dictionaries with the little nasal N and the caret. So it's frustrating that this project dropped because we couldn't decide on the spelling of the name of this program. So again, South Dakota State, a little bit more on the conservative side. They don't have as much inclusivity to indigeneity into their spaces. So I can understand where, where that, I don't know, the discretion, or how would you say, like, I don't understand like why, like I understand like they may not they're not ready for including indigenous languages just yet. if I were to continue to brand it, and again, needing to know plants, I should have put the plant in here, but if you can get, kind of grasp this concept of color palettes, and thinking about, again, I come from the prairie. People, when they think of the prairie, they think of, corn crops, they think of cattle. Like, to me, all that's just colonization. Like, folks don't really know like a lot of prairie flowers, or they may not be able to name 5 of them. I can't even name 5 myself in the English form. I just know the Lakota names for them. But in thinking about, just know that we have some beautiful flowers in the prairie. They may not be as beautiful as like the Hawaiian flowers, but we have some colors within there. So this is just me. Again, I work in a digital format. I drop a picture of a color of a flower. I can take the eyedropper, pick that hue. The nice thing about working in like Photoshop or Illustrator, like I just boost that saturation, like bring out some of those dyes that, let's say I have a photo from the 1800s, it has a paint that is kind of like diluted or faded. If we can at least just grasp what roots made that color, we can revitalize that color in a digital space. So this is just me continuing that branding of Wheezy Pond, and then utilizing the colors that come from the prairie flowers. So those are some of my main things. Just other things I show within here. Again, just conventions, just things that might be a little bit different that you may not see outside of the grasslands or the prairie. We have some ledger art. So again, the Calverley days, Battle Little Bighorn. I feel like the generation that was really interested in a lot of that John Wayne, all those Westerns or all those wars. I feel like it's not as popular as it used to be anymore, but we still, there's still homage paid to that ledger art. Again, I feel like a lot of folks are still caught up in graphic design, or seeing Native American graphic design as patterns and symbols, where a lot of it is actually just land tropes. So there's a lot of little florals. So this is just showing a distinction where you might see the style of a floral or a flower. This is more my Dakota side. So looking at maybe how flowers were illustrated back in the day, like pre 1500s, and we're around like that Minnesota area. So that Dakota is a little bit more eastern than South Dakota here. And I'll try to pay homage to that too. Again, like I grew up with grandmothers. Like this actually, again, just a side note, like growing up with my grandmother, man, she had me out in the garden pulling weeds. In South Dakota, we have this weed called the creeping Jenny, and she is the hardest vine. She is the hardest weed to pull. So I was just thinking about pulling the creeping Jenny weeds out of my grandmother's garden and her flowers, and I was paying homage to that. So just a little bit of a side humor in there. Again, in thinking about that confrontation where like a lot of those women warriors, or where some of that comes from, I'm gonna nail these down. I'm just gonna give a little bit of relevance of how these conversations are today, and then I'll wrap up with some of my graphic design work here. So quickly, 2 things in thinking about this work, or just in thinking about why, Indigenous women are still fighting the US government, is we're still affected by colonization. So again, lecture, trying to define these. Anytime you see the word decolonization, colonization, just think of place and think of land. One opposing, or two parties that are always at war when fighting for land. And in the United States, and I know decolonization is coming up just like DEI, and people aren't grasping it, but all you need to know for this particular presentation is, when I'm talking about decolonization, I'm talking about the confrontation of land rights in between the US government and Indigenous governments. I'm not talking about, how DEI realms in this, but just to quickly define it, occupiance of land, space, land, versus when we're looking at decolonialism, we're not necessarily talking about place, we're talking about rules, policies, and structure. So if you see that word colonialism, think of the Bible. Or think of like, why do we drink orange juice for breakfast? Or why do I have to write a resume to apply for the job? Like all those are like rules or norms or policies. All of that will fit in conversations around decolonialism. But for Indigenous people, we were really stuck within the realm of decolonization. So again, land, fighting over land rights. Here's that looping GIF, just a heads up. There's some police brutality in here. It's still happening. Again, women warriors, we drop everything and go to the front lines. And just to know that colonization is still happening. Again, thinking about that, wanting to put in pipelines, exploiting resources. That's at the beginning slides where my grandmothers were holding my pieces. You know, they're occupying banks so that they fund pipelines and stuff like that. So it's still a lot going on. I know there's a lot going on in the news too, what's going on overseas, but it's just insane to me that we're here in the United States and this doesn't get enough publicity as other wars are going on. But this is a little bit outdated, again, from 2020. I'm just going to quickly kind of go through the progression of a tribal government here. So in summer 2020, the eastern state of Oklahoma, they honored the land rights of the nation. So anything that happens within these spaces, that tribal government has say and authority. So for example, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Seminole, Muskogee, Cherokee, let's say that like Hollywood want to come film a movie. So I'm thinking about like the Killers of the Moon. Like they need authority from the government of this space too, as well as the state of Oklahoma, or let's say like a meteorite, or maybe they found like a dinosaur fossil or something, anything that needs some type of authority. Now, since these indigenous governments are recognized, they can have say on how to protocol something. So I feel like that's, you know, progression and nation to nation building, but just in thinking about how it might be relevant for somebody who's listening to this presentation. You might work at a university, or you might work at a company or corporation where you might have to work with that indigenous government. And if you don't have any competency of what that indigenous government is or what it does, it's going to be a hard relation to keep. So I feel like, again, the need to get more indigenous ideologies into spaces when working at a government level. Saying a little bit more of a struggle in South Dakota. So if you ever come with your family, you come to Mount Rushmore, man, the U.S. government is probably we're still at confrontation. I have pride to say that, again, those Lakota women holding it down, holding those rifles in front of those homes, like we have the longest court case with the United States, and that's the ownership of the Black land, the Black Hills. If you've been to South Dakota, you know that Mount Rushmore is in the Black Hills. So there's no way that the US government is gonna, you know, give us our land rights just yet. But if they did, man, graphic designers, we are the ones. And again, if there's one thing that I would ask everybody to leave here is like one of the strongest tools of colonization is a map. As a graphic designer, and if you know, if the US government would happen to, you know, follow the treaties, we're gonna have to go back and redesign those maps. But because they got that Mount Rushmore in there, it's a little bit harder. So again, when thinking about Google Maps, like, are you ready? Like, again, if, you know, in the future, in my lifetime, if we're ready to give back the land or just give back the stewardship rights, like we got a lot of maps that we need to redesign. So these are just clippings of just areas. Again, it's more in the West and more maybe California and more in the Northwest area. I feel like Texas, you don't have as many federally recognized tribes, so you might not see a lot of this just yet. But just even like big or small, like again, Eureka, we're looking at the Oregon area, states, families, landowners are turning over just a few acres, thousands of acres, you know, just small and large lands back to tribes because they can't take care of it. I come from South Dakota. If you're over-tilling soil and you're killing soil, like you're not taking care of it. If you can't take care of it, give it back to the tribe. But just in thinking about, yeah, like Nez Perce tribe, like Oregon, even if it's just a little 148 acres, like Oregon doesn't own that anymore, which means the outline of the state of Oregon needs to be redesigned. So I think, again, probably didn't think about it. Indigenous designer probably wasn't in the space to explain that. Now we got, I think, Colville's, I believe in Washington. Oh yeah, Spokane, Washington, 10,000 acres. Again, Washington's going to need a state redesign. We're looking at the Pitt River tribe, which is in California. Again, a lot of it's happening. It's just not exposed, and it's still kind of like brushed under the bus a little bit. I share this one because I feel like, again, if you're working within business, if you know, Ralph keeps mentioning that fast food chain. If I'm gonna, you know, brand a fast food company, I'm probably not going to ask for money or a grant from the US government. I'm going to ask money for one of these tribes, and it's progression. Again, you probably not see a lot of these indigenous governments buying properties in Vegas. Like this was a huge win. Sam Manuel bought the Palms. We got the down in Miami, Florida, we got the Seminoles. They bought the Hard Rock. the Mandan or Arikara Hidatsa up in North Dakota. They just bought a plot south of the Luxor. They're experts in casino revenue. So in thinking about the money that they get from the casinos, they give it back to the poor, they give grants to poor tribes. So I'm thinking about building like their fire stations or schools. Like I feel like I have a better chance at getting a grant from one of those wealthier tribes, a sovereign nation, than I do with the US government. So we have our own nation-to-nation relationship. So lastly, I'm wrapping up here. Again, I know I'm taking a lot of time. My work working within the higher education spaces. Again, schools, man, I don't want to, I can go all day and talking about racist mascots, but again, during the pandemic, University of Illinois, they put an implementation plan and dropping the racist mascot. So this was what it was at the beginning, or changing it. I'm not in means of changing it, but they're trying to. But in thinking about means of needing competency or concentration of building trust after the dependence on a racist mascot. So in places like Illinois, just even in places like Ohio or Louis or Kentucky, I don't know, maybe like Arkansas, or just in that more of that southeastern area where there just isn't a lot of representation. How many consultants like, man, Ohio alone has like the most high schools with racist mascots, but they don't realize the harm of it. So again, just needing more people educated to build those competency levels of why, utilizing a racist mascot is harmful. So wrapping up Women's History Month, I'm going to highlight some of the work where I give some visuals to women and Indigenous women. Inawawongsape is a scholarship for single mothers. So again, if I have to brand the scholarship, I'm going to put a woman, or I'm going to put a mother in there. But this is just an example of eliminating the need of using feathers, the need of using headdresses. Like, let's put in some adornment pieces, make her look like she's going to look like what she is today. So again, in working with students, we might be doing this exercise or as assignment, like you don't have to use the stereotypes, like adorn them of what we dress today. We even talk about men. So just in thinking about in this purple, the individual in the purple piece. So these are podcast covers, by the way, for like health. One of the episodes is about men in health. But again, if you're doing representation of a man in health, Indigenous men, and like this individual might look a little more androgynous. We may not know if it's a man or female. And again, the Indigenous men, they don't have those man tropes. Indigenous men don't have beards. They have long hair. They need representation too, but just how people read gender, they may not, they may mix up, or they may not know how to identify this gentleman. So again, just pushing, as the graphic designer, I'm responsible in showing what that looks like. Here's working with the American Indian College Fund. Again, just trying to highlight students. This is actually just an example of, you can highlight indigeneity without the stereotypes. So we have some flowers in there, and it's just stuff, just recent stuff that we've been working on within their, highlighting some of their scholarship winners. And then I'm going to wrap up on this piece here. So I did this mural for the American Indian College Fund. It was, just a student's journey to the pandemic time, hence why she has that face mask on. Again, example of a student. She doesn't look like she was in the 1800s. She looked like she's from now. She's in front of the world. When you bring in Indigenous people, we're going to bring in all our land knowledge. So there's, metaphors of like flourishment or blooming within the florals. And then lastly, there's this ribbon here. I apologize. You're going to have to turn your head to kind of see it or decipher it, but I'm going to break it down so to kind of help build that competency. But I'm circling over this green triangle symbol here. There's a large triangle, some little right angle ones. If you turn your head, and if you can make out that that's a tree. So there's a tree, and then there's my little roots again coming from the tree, and then there's blue little zigzags, and that's just representation for air. So all this ribbon, and then the red here, if you think of it as like the recycling symbol. So all this ribbon is saying is that trees clean air. And then, it's a cycle of reciprocity, and it just goes on and on and on and on. So, so wrapping up here. So again, like I said, it was a lot. I wanted to cram many things, highlight my family, highlight, the histories that I come from, how I bring in some of that pride and the activism and the advocacy into my work. And then again, as a researcher, as a scholar, as an educator, really trying to push more students into working with Indigenous governments. So again, appreciate everyone joining on today, allowing me to speak here. I'm going to come back to the Zoom space. And yeah, and then just open to questions or just anything, kind of getting orientated back into the Zoom screen here.
Sadie Red Wing, I want to ask you a question. So the reason we do this is for our students. I mean, everybody here at the college is trying to help students change the way they think, act, and feel about so many things in the world, because maybe they haven't heard both sides. So are there any steps? So now we've learned about some history of your family and your tribe, but is there anything you recommend for by step to ensure a better future for, you know, these 600 nations in the United States? So that's because I'm trying to change the way students think, act, and feel. You know, that's my goal in class. I fail a lot, but I'm trying to see the world differently and things. So what do you recommend? Are there any things you recommend that we have a better future for people?
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like it's a little bit of a loaded question, but just within the time, I do my best to give like some points here. So I feel like, again, just trends and the one thing that's really challenging is depending on where you're at in the United States, your competency level is different. So if we cut the United States in half, I feel like because colonization hit hardest and the longest on the eastern half of the nation, there's not much access to resources. And then the competency level is low because states in the eastern half, they don't work with indigenous governments often. Classes aren't predominantly indigenous. On the news channels, you don't watch, you know, how your state might be working or maybe participating in a land auction or maybe like a soil regeneration project. So I feel like there's the lack of exposure. So anytime I come into a space, I have to do a temperature check. I'm like, all right, are folks familiar with like indigenous governments, nation? Are you not? You know, so one thing that I didn't point out, and I notice I hear myself say this a lot in my class, particularly as a graphic designer, is coming from a tribal system or coming from a chief. The chiefs would, or from what we know through transcripts, or just even now, a strong chief keeps everybody on the same page. So a strong form of leadership keeps everybody on the same page. Right now, the United States is not on the same page. Not saying that maybe the leadership isn't the strongest, but it would make my life a lot better if everybody was on the same page when it comes to just indigeneity at whole. In thinking about steps. So I feel like what has been progressing, and I feel like, and I just saw on the news, like, you know, how the state of Florida is taking out DEI initiatives into workspaces. But in thinking about, these are trends and trends are going to change. But I feel like folks, if you're not on board or just not even in conversations around diversity, inclusion, equity, you get a diverse group of people, make sure that they're all included. Equity is, you know, equaling out all the resources. And in thinking about the next step after that, it's happening in Canada now. I feel like it's happening maybe in just pockets within the United States more west, but next is going to come up as sustainability. If you want to bring sustainability initiatives or sustainability models into a workspace, you're going to have conversation around exploitation of resources. You're going to have conversation around decolonization. You're going to have conversations around how to be more eco-friendly. So the push, so I'm thinking about a student now, if you're listening, in 10 years, you might be in a workspace where you're not talking about DEI anymore. You're going to be talking about how to be more sustainable. What's the longevity of a particular company or program or a job that you might be working at? Now, for students that are, and I'm speaking particularly to design students, but I feel like this could be similar to any other student that might be listening. I feel like in places where people are trying to be more inclusive to the indigenous demographic, they're celebrating holidays like Indigenous Peoples Day. You know, they're doing Native American Heritage Month. And if, let's say I have a student where I ask them like, hey, can you design a flyer for Indigenous Peoples Day? Or, hey, you know, there's that fast food chain that's coming up, would you be able to brand that? And being put into a responsibility where you have to work with somebody, or you might have to do a little bit more of the research aspect. I feel like just the starting points is in being, and again, this is an Indigenous perspective, it's not like an international perspective. So I'm thinking about coming as an Indigenous person, the first thing that I suggest in starting that design search is how, like, do you know what is indigenous to your state? So let's say that, you know, example, PBS in North Carolina, they want to do some branding for some of their programming that highlights Native American History Month. The state of North Carolina, they got 8 state recognized tribes, but they don't have strong visual sovereignty. So if someone who has no idea, you know, just doesn't know what proper questions to ask, doesn't want to be in conversation around appropriation, you know, just doesn't know how to navigate through, like, just talking about stereotypes, the first thing I tell that person is, well, we as Indigenous people, we're really simple when it comes to, we just want to see land resources. Instead of relying on, let's say, a pattern, or instead of relying on a headdress or a profile of an Indigenous person, start with our plants. Like, show us our plants. Like, it's super simple, super easy. Landscapes, I feel like you probably see more landscapes, maybe more in the mountain ranges, like in the Phoenix area, or the Rocky Mountains, where you know, they can read the peaks of a mountain better than they can read the silhouette of a city. So just in thinking about the first things that I suggest is, in working or being more inclusive, the Indigenous people just want to know, just want to see what they know, and we know land. Like, that is our advantage as a race in this nation. So if you could just start there, you don't need to know languages. You don't need to know, you know, you don't need to decipher symbols. If you can just know, let's say, just one flower species indigenous to the continent North America, or indigenous to that state, that's a step in the right direction. Again, breaking away that stereotypes of being land lovers, but just, again, like, you're targeting the audience. We want to be more inclusive. It's always, when we root down to it, it's a battle over soil. And just depending on the terrain or landscape or where you are in the United States. So conversations in the Grand Canyon are a lot different than the conversations in the Hudson Bay, but even just baby stepping into, you know, just getting into that realm of research or how to ask questions. Start just, you know, what do I know that's indigenous to the land? Last note, and I'll pull back on that, is, for example, if I was working in the state of South Dakota, and again, like, we have all this in, like, in our textbooks of, like, you know, the state flag, the state song, the state bird. The state bird of South Dakota is a pheasant. A pheasant comes from China. Like, to me, it doesn't make sense. Like, why is a Chinese bird our state bird when it's not even indigenous to this continent? So just even changing those little things. So that would be my suggestion, but just a heads up. I'm seeing DI in the chat here. Again, if anybody has any questions, I can answer. I know we're at time here, but yeah, just in thinking about just indigenous first things, items are indigenous to your location first.
Okay,
Yeah, I love that. That's so fun.
questions, anybody?
Oh, Rachel.
Go ahead,
Hi,
Joe.
thank you. Hi, I'm Rachel Bauer. I'm an art and art history professor here. Thank you so much for this talk. It was really inspiring and eye-opening. I was just wondering, for our students out there, what inspired you to get into the graphic design field? And you know, are there any tips for students that, you know, might want to see themselves as a professor like you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to kind of keep it short and sweet, like, and this is dating my age too. So I grew up in 90s, so immersed in pop culture, media. Like, I wanted to be on MTV. Like, I grew up, you know, internet where, you know, we got social media like MySpace. So I was really interested in, like, coding on those MySpace pages. Like, this is all before, like, Instagram and Facebook. And then also, like, I'm really into sports, or just even just other things that maybe you don't even see women in. Like, I was at the time, X Games was a huge thing. And I was like, oh, like, I'm gonna go be a snowboarder. I'm gonna, you know, be a BMX biker, because you don't see a lot of women in those areas. But in thinking about, if I was gonna put myself in a place, I would want, you know, so if I was gonna be a snowboarder, which I never will because I hate snow now, like, I want a snowboard that represents me, but I can't go into, like, any Shields or sporting goods store and find something at the time. So early 2000s. So the inspiration was, if I can't buy the things that I want, I'm gonna have to make them. And then again, like, in high school, before going into a graphic design program, like, a lot of my friends were, you know, inspiring musicians, maybe rappers. So I was asked to make a lot of party flyers, you know, album covers. and all those. So I liked it. I can't work in materials. Like I can't do pottery. Like it's hard for me to do any jewelry. So in thinking about my forte just came in those areas where just a lack of representation. If I want it, I'm just gonna have to invent it. Design, take out the word design, put the word invent in. So that's what led me to here. My suggestions for those that would want to go into the art and design realm, how I break this down just quickly, art, and again, I'm saying this informally, is not to say selfish practice, but you can make things for your own self. So meaning that art is a very form of expression, showing emotions. I can do anything. Like I can, put white paint on a canvas and, or I can do a music piece, or I can do, make a culinary treat or something. As a design, I say it's a little bit more selfless in the sense that I have to design something for a particular audience. Like I can't necessarily design something for myself. I can create graphic art for myself, but I have to think about the other. I have to think about who I'm targeting. Particularly the power of graphic design that I discovered on my own was, man, I didn't realize that how powerful a graphic designer shows somebody their nationality. So meaning that if you're going to leave from art and design school, it's not like you are immediately applying to go design for the White House. So I feel like there's kind of like that glass ceiling. But for me as an Indigenous, graphic designer or working in Indigenous communities, there's a lot of not clients, but there's a lot of demographics that want to do language revitalization. When you're working with languages or you're working with the nationality identities, like that is a strong responsibility. Like you're literally showing someone what their language looks like. And I think when you start to think in the deeper sense, like it is my job to show someone their language. I can't mess that up. I can't fabricate it. And then even thinking about if I'm showing someone what their nationality, when I'm talking about nationality, I'm talking about like passports, driver's license, your nation's flags, like anything that shows you as a citizen to a particular nation, that can't be fabricated either. So I feel like once I kind of, discovered the power of like the responsibility of visually communicating those, they're not serious, but those more like identities that can't be fabricated. It gave me a greater appreciation. And then it just like, wow, like you don't learn about a lot of this terminology in the design curriculum, maybe at a graduate level, but if students can go in and thinking about you have a lot of responsibility of visually communicating as a designer. You have a little bit more freedom as an artist, then I feel like the profession is more, I don't know. I feel like students have a greater appreciation going into that profession, knowing that it's extremely important. Also, that was a great question.
Anybody else? Anybody else have a question for Sadie Red Wing?
I have a question, Sadie. Oh, do you have a question? What gives you hope? I have had so much hope here listening to you as an artist and inventor, and also this part of you that's scholarly and at an institution of higher education. So what gives you, I mean, you give me hope by being who you are in the place and space that you have and that you occupy and that you make shine. What gives you hope for the future?
Yeah, so I'm going to drop 2 links in the chat here. I was just listening to these podcasts in the morning. I'm going to try to talk and answer this at the same time. So like I said, again, like it's not a fact, but I feel like many institutions are going to hop on board in what it means to be more eco-friendly in places. And in thinking about going on the research of being more sustainable, we're going to get into conversations around land stewardship and just, land preservation, or just thinking about like, man, like we got a lot of cancer in the Midwest. Where is it coming from? Is it coming from pesticides? Is it coming from bad diets, or, just air pollution and stuff like that? So I know right now, and again, this is just an assumption. It's like, I don't have any citations or fact to back this up, but I feel like in thinking about hopes for the future, there's going to be a time where people are going to need those they're going to start questioning about how to, what's a reciprocal model, what's a sustainability model. But a lot of it is going to be in that conversation on flight against climate change. The 2 links I put in there, I just listened to Melinda Adams' podcast this morning. I did a similar podcast. But what gives me hope is that I see more students in these positions getting ready in preparation for that next trend coming up. Because for myself, it took me a long time. Again, like 2016, I was still navigating how to talk about stereotypes. It's taken me like from 2016 till now just to be direct in, or even, I'm not even direct yet, like just to really practice, like how do you communicate, but then how do you translate a concept that people know, but they just may not have heard it in this particular way. And things that are giving me hope is things like this, having the space to talk, Zoom, pandemic, I was able to, was invited to many places. And then in thinking about that connection of, someone that might be struggling with the lack of resources. So thinking about students, I feel like students are getting better at asking questions, or just in thinking about like, man, I really want to do this project. I'm not getting the response I get from one of my professors. I have a lot of drive to do this project. I'm going to take the effort to reach out and ask somebody. So I think just even that motivation of just asking, or just even questions, getting out that concept of assumption. I assume this might be the right way to do it, kind of going in through that process of, I want to be more mindful. So I think the next generation that's coming up is in that little more mindful aspect. And I think what is going to transition in is that folks that aren't on board, folks that aren't in, aren't bringing Indigenous folks to the table, they're going to fall behind when it comes to, just where we might be progressing as a nation when it comes to climate change. And I feel like those conversations of Indigenous educators are outside the United States. And again, that's when it kind of feels a little bit more on the powerless, because we're not government workers. Like, we work in academic. It's not like I can walk into the White House and make changes, easy or like that. So I think there will be a time where the Indigenous expertise is going to be needed. And just to see students like Melinda Adams, who's now a professor at Kansas University around fire aspect, she has a different, ideology than I do, because I come from the prairie. She comes from the desert area. Sorry, there's a siren coming over here. But yeah, just to see the Indigenous population growing in spaces, I hope it hits more east, because I feel like East Coast the eastern half of the nation needs it more, but just a means of mindfulness, asking questions, going through the process of research, not through assumption, and then just providing that space for more representation to get us all on the same page. So that's my hope. Hopefully in the lifetime I can see it. We're getting a little bit closer, but I'm surprised that I don't have to talk about stereotypes anymore. So I have a little bit of hope that we can progress further into conversations that are a little bit more in depth than just tackling just those words around appropriation or stereotypes and stuff.
Well, Sadie Red Wing, unless there's other questions, I just want to thank you. I'm very grateful. I'm thankful we got to visit again, and now hopefully we reach some students and others, and I'm just I'm glad I met you, and I'm glad you were able to come help us today.
Absolutely. And again, if you're a student on, and if you have a question or something, Ralph has my email address. I'll just pop it in the chat too. I admit I check my email more than I check my Instagram or social media. So feel free to reach out for any questions. Again, I always prioritize students looking for resources that their university may not have. And again, that's not their, that's just, it's nothing to be insecure about. Again, this happens across the nation. A lot of us are suffering with the lack of resources, and it's just about just finding that one person just to give some direction or to be helpful, then answering maybe some questions are a little bit more on the challenging side. Again, Ralph, thank you. Thank you to all for letting me come in. Hope to come make a visit in person again soon. And then, all right. And then again, go Wolfpack, North Carolina, go to North Carolina teams and in the March Madness brackets. But again, yeah, thank you. And we'll follow up with you again, Ralph. It's great to see you again.
And blessings all of y'all that attended and were able to be here. Y'all have a blessed week. Thank y'all.
Take care.
Thank you.
I'd like to see that link.